So what you're looking at on screen is actually running in a web browser. If I go back, you can see I can navigate this little directory, and when I open up one of these files, I'm getting live views. And the piece you should be paying attention to the most is the fact that I have a cloud office suite now working. That's right, finally got Collabora working with Filestash. In this video, I'll talk about getting Filestash set up and then getting Collabora working with Filestash. So before we get too deep into this, just be aware I'm not going to cover every single thing about getting a total cloud server set up. There's just way too much involved. So some ground rules. Here's where I am starting from. I am going to do this assuming you already have Docker set up, that you already have a domain name registered and subdomains that you can use on that domain name. For some pointers, I use Portbun for my domain name registry, and then I use Cloudflare to manage some stuff. So if you're looking for a direction to head in, that's where I went. I also have my Docker set up on a Debian virtual machine that's running on Proxmox. So again, in case you're curious which direction to go, that's what I've got going. Now, in order for Filestash to work, you already have to have your storage backend set up. And so here on the screen, you can see you can use a variety of backends for this thing. I am using Samba, just because it allows me to access stuff locally really easily, and it integrates into Filestash easily, and it just minimizes a lot of problems. Now, again, I'm not saying that's going to be the best for every use case. It just works for me because I'm a single person using this system, and so I don't have a lot of people to manage on this thing, and Samba shares work pretty well. So as long as you've already got that set up, you've got to get Filestash set up. You then need to work out your reverse proxy. Now, I'm going to use Caddy for my reverse proxy. You could use Nginx. There are other ways to do it. I only know how to use Caddy because I am a baby in this world. So I'll show you how to get Caddy set up. So you're going to have to get a network set up for your containers to be able to talk to each other by name. And then we're going to have to get Collabora set up and integrated into all this stuff, and then all the reverse proxies set up so that you can access everything. All right, so first place, let's get Filestash going. All right, so you can see I actually use Portainer to manage all my Docker containers, and I'm also, by the way, not using everything that's in here, so all the image stuff, just ignore. I was doing some testing. I haven't touched that stuff in months. I'll probably remove it because I just really don't use it that much. But you can see I've got Caddy, Collabora, and Filestash running. So in Portainer, I can just add a container. Now, you could also do your configuration with like a Docker Compose file. It works just fine. I like Portainer. It just, again, gives me a nice GUI to mess with everything. So you go up here to the right, and I'm just going to click Add Container. All right, and so then we're going to need to give it a name. And again, I would typically just use Filestash for your name. All right, and then we're going to pull the container. So as you can see here, we're going to use machines/filestash:\latest. And that's going to pull the latest image from this container. We're going to click always pull the image. All right, so we're going to need some ports. So under port mapping, just click map additional port. And then we're going to use 8334, and that's going to be a TCP port. So this is the port mapping that we're going to use. Keep scrolling down. All right, so now we've got all the advanced container settings that we need to get set up. And before I go through how I'm going to get this set up, I just want to let you know where I found some of the stuff that I'm doing. This is the official Filestash website, and down in the installation, if you look, he actually gives you commands to do like a Docker Compose. And if you want to do that, that's fine. There are some things that we're going to end up modifying later, but this will get you going. So it will work to get Filestash working, but it doesn't quite work to get Collabora going the way it's written. But the thing I'm going to point out is in these commands right here, there's a link to his Docker Compose YAML. And so this is where you can find like the settings that I'm using. If they ever change this may be a good place to come look, right? And so right here, you can see his stuff for the Filestash container itself. That's what I'm currently working on. And so here's where you can see the image, right? That machines/Filestash latest. We're going to set restart to always. So on the environmental variables, we're going to use canary equals true. And then these URLs, we're going to talk about that here in a second, because these are what we're going to have to change going forward. But you can see the port I mapped, the 8334, and then we're going to have to set up a volume. Now, again, this is what it looks like if you do Docker Compose work. In Portainer, that's what I'm about to show you. All right, so to set up a volume, because we need to set up a volume for, that container's data. So you click on volume, and then we're going to do map additional volume. All right, so for the container, we're going to do /app/data/state. And then for the volume, and basically what's happening is the container volume is how the container sees the data, but it's going to be mapped onto basically the virtual machine host in its drive, right? So we need to tell it where on the actual host drive to map the data into. So we're going to bind that to a path /data/filestash_state. You can name it kind of whatever you want. Again, this is just what I'm going to call it. You can call it other stuff and it's not going to matter. It's basically just a path on the host where it's going to stash the data, right? And by the way, this is not your actual file data. This is just data for the container. So now we need to go over to environmental variables. And so we need to add some environmental variables. So you just click to add one. And this is where in the YAML, that's these environment things that we need to do. So we're going to do the application URL. We're going to do the canary. And for the office URLs, I'm going to wait and we're going to come back and do those after we get the Collabora container set up in a minute. All right, so we've got application URL. And here's where you're going to want to put the domain that you have registered that you're going to use to reverse proxy everything. This is where you want to put that. I wouldn't really use your root domain here. So like, if you've got www.yourmom.com, I would tend to give it like a subdomain. So something like filestash.yourmom.com, because you're going to have multiple little services that you might want to do, and you don't want it just all going through. So like I said, here I do like filestash.yourmom.com, right? And so this is going to point it, hey, this is where your application will be mapped. We're going to add another one, and this is for the canary, and we're going to have that equal to true. So, and just so you know, there are other ways to actually load in. So if like you ever have a really complicated set of environmental variables that you need to do, you can load them in from a file. You can also go over here to advanced mode, and it gives you more of the text editor interface, and you can do it through here. Again, if you need to copy paste like a bunch of stuff, this will also work. Okay, then we're going to go to restart policy, and we're going to always restart. And that's basically it. At this point, it's going to create the container. Well, we need to hit deploy, so we're going to deploy the container. It's going to load up, and then we're going to have to go to the administrative interface. So on the container, again, it's going to load up Filestash. We haven't done reverse proxying yet, so none of that's going to work because we don't have Caddy set up. But we can actually test the Filestash server at this point, but we actually have to get it configured. And so you go through the admin interface. So that's where this port that we've got mapped, that's going to come into play, because what you're going to want to do is we need to go to your local network IP address for whatever server is hosting the Docker containers, and use that IP address and this port, and that's going to go to Filestash, but we need to go to the admin, and that's going to be that IP address at this port, and then /admin. Now, by the way, the first time you go through that, it's going to ask you to set up an admin password, so make sure you save that, or else you're going to have to redo the whole thing. But you get your admin account set up, and then we're going to go in and get the storage backend set up and get Filestash going. All right, so here we are in my backend. No jokes. And this is where you're going to pick what kind of storage you're using. And again, I'm using a Samba share, so I tell it Samba. And authentication might be important. So one thing that I have enabled on my Filestash backend is multi-factor authentication. And so I'm going to do local to get that set up. And then here I've got TOTP. And so that multi-factor authentication is going to mean whenever a user logs in, they also are going to have to use like Authy or some sort of authenticator app to generate a code to get them in. And that just, again, provides a little bit of multi-factor authentication. So to get the backend set up, again, I'm using an SMB share. So the host name is going to be the IP address for wherever the Samba share is. So mine's on my local network, so I put in the IP address on my local home network because I'm not going over the internet for this. I don't have a username or password on it because it's all local. And again, if somebody hacks through the server, there's nothing I can do at that point anyway. And there's only one person accessing it. It's just me accessing this SMB share, so I don't mess with passwords. If you have that set up on your SMB shares, this is where you would put that in. The path is going to be the file directory on the local NAS server, and you do need the slashes before and after that. The port is usually 445. Since I am not using passwords or anything, I just put in work group. And then for the share name, this is what you're going to call it. And mine is called QuickNAS because it's set up on an SSD and it's fast. So there's my backend setup, right? And that's pretty much it. So now at this point, it's pretty close to being able to be tested, but we need to add a user account, right? Because right now we only have the admin set up. So we're going to go over to settings over here, and now we got to finish setting up like a user account. And this is also where you would finish up setting up like where the address is going to be for the mapping. And now we've got the management GUI, so the simple user management. And so we just click on that. You can see I've already got my user set up, but we go into user management. And here's where, again, you can just add a user account. All right, so this we can put in their email, put in a password for them, give them a role, or you can block, delete users, whatever you want in here. So once you're done, now you will go to your actual domain and the subdomain where Filestash is set up. All right, so now that we have a user set up, we can do some testing. So since we don't have the reverse proxy set up yet, we can't use the domain access because, again, there's no external access currently without a reverse proxy, but we can test it locally. So if you go to the IP address of the server where everything's hosted and the port, and again, we set this thing up on port 8334, so you basically go to the IP address :8334, you should get the user access where it asks you for your login, and then you can set up the multi-factor authentication, and then you should see files popping up, right? It should be working if you've already got your SMB share set up and everything's working that way. And since I know you can see all this, by the way, these IP addresses, these are not the correct IP addresses, right? These are the internal kind of container IP addresses, I think on the bridge network, but those are not the ones that you need to access. You need to access this on the IP address of the server where Docker is being hosted. All right, so when we navigate that, this is what the user login screen looks like. So I'm gonna hide this because, again, this is my actual login information. But there's an email and a password. And once you've got that entered, now we've got to do our MFA. And again, I've already got it set up. Let me do my Authy, and then you're in. And again, as long as everything's been configured on the back end, you got your SMB share working and everything mapped correctly, then everything should just work, right? So this is what it looks like after you've got it set up. But at this point, again, you don't have it reverse proxied, so you won't be able to access it off site. We also don't have the office set up. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to get Caddy set up, and then get the Caddy configured to do reverse proxy, and then we'll move on to Collabora. So we're going to get up a Caddy container, basically set up the same way through Portainer. Here you can see kind of the way Caddy says to do their Docker Compose. Now, again, I'm going to be using Portainer, but this kind of tells you what we're going to need. The restart unless stopped, image, and again, it's going to be Caddy latest, so that'll always pull the most current one. And then we're going to set up some volumes for this stuff, and that's going to be it. So again, add a container, we're going to call it Caddy. We're pulling Caddy : latest. We always pull the image, that way every time we redo it, it will update. We've got to map 2 ports, and that'll be port 80 and port 443. All right, so that's what we got to do because we're going to be doing reverse proxy. These are the ports also you're going to need to set up on your home, like firewall or something, to do forwarding. So again, this is what's got to happen. And again, I'm not going to cover that part. I'm going to assume that you can handle that. So on the volumes, pretty much the same process as last time. We're going to be binding some volumes. And so here, you'll see you'll need one for the Caddy file, one for config, and one for data. And you can see what I've got mapped here. Now, do remember this path to the Caddy file, because that's where we have to do the configuration of the reverse proxy stuff, and you will have to navigate back there later whenever we start setting up the reverse proxy. So remember that path, because that's where we've got to go to edit this Caddy file. All right, so on the restart policy, I've got mine set to always rather than unless stopped, but that's pretty much it. At this point, you just deploy the container and Caddy will start running, and we need to go out to the command line of your server, again, where you're hosting Docker, and then we need to edit that Caddy file. So, by the way, if you ever forget like where your Caddy file is, so go out to the container and just click on the details, then scroll down all the way to the bottom. And so under volumes, look for the host volume, and you see where it says data caddy file. That's where we need to go. That is the configuration file. So you can actually just copy it with a Control-C. And then I usually use Nano to edit. If you don't have it installed, you can install it, or you can use any other text editor you want. So do Nano, and then you do Control-Shift-V, or I think you can just middle click, and then we've got our path, and now you can edit your Caddy file. So here's the basic Caddy file that you need to have to get Filestash working. Now, you don't have to have all the blocks that I've got. Now, look, this all depends on how you got your domain structured, but essentially the most basic thing you need to do is the reverse proxying of the Filestash container to the correct domain. And so the domain, right, so wherever you want it to show up, your subdomain. So like, again, for example, filestash.yourdomainname.com. So I've just got filestash.yourmom.com. The header here, not totally necessary. This is just to prevent crawlers from indexing it, although a lot of AI crawlers ignore this anyway. But then this, right, reverse underscore proxy, your Filestash container, your port 8334. All right, and so that's what we need to get the reverse proxy. And now with that, whenever we restart Caddy with this Caddy file saved, there you go, right? Then you should be able to navigate to this address, and Filestash should show you your files. So basically you edit your Caddy file like this, and now we need to set up our bridge network. All right, so back out to the console, we are going to create a network so that these containers can talk to each other. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it the Filestash network or just Caddy network, right? Whatever you want. I'd probably go with something like Caddy network, simply because everything is going to be talking to Caddy for the most part. But so we're going to write Docker network create, and then again, whatever network name. So again, you could call it like Caddy network or something like that, right? Again, whatever you want to call it. So let's say that I call it Caddy my network. The next thing to do is attach the containers to the network. So for that, you say Docker network, if I spell it right, network connect, and then you can give it an alias if you want. So I'm going to say like Caddy, and then you would do the network name, it's Caddy network, Caddy. So what this will allow you to do is take a container and give it a different alias for the network. It's pretty redundant the way I'm doing it, but it just is saying attach the Caddy container to the Caddy network with an alias of Caddy, right? You then would have to go through this for Filestash again. So basically you would be attaching the Caddy container to the network, and then you have to go and you attach Filestash to the network. So I would do docker network connect alias Filestash Caddy network Filestash, and my console's jacking up here, so it doesn't look right, but same format as the last command. At that point, you should have both Caddy and Filestash on the same network, and then we're just going to go and restart the containers. You shouldn't necessarily need to restart the containers, but now that I've got them all configured, I'm just going to go ahead and restart them. So out in Portainer, you click whatever containers you want to restart, and then you just click restart. Right, and it'll give you a little indicator, hey, we've restarted these things. Now, you should be able to navigate to what your domain name is that you set up for Filestash, and you should get that web interface. Again, if that does not work, then we've got an error. We got to go back through and do some checking to figure out what we've got wrong. But at that point, you should have a good web interface, and Caddy should be reverse proxying Filestash to that URL, that domain name that you've got set up, where you've got everything mapped. And now the last part, we've got to get Collabora set up. And I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly. It's Collabora or Collabora. I think Collabora, it sounds like collaborate. That's what I'm going with. I'll show you where I got this, because it's important to recognize that getting Collabora set up to work with Filestash doesn't work the way Filestash officially tells you how to do it right now. So where I did figure out how to get the little details fixed was both me bashing my head against it for a while and some people on GitHub. So let's go to the GitHub and I'll show you where you can dig for more answers. Should you be doing like Nginx setup or doing Docker Compose and stuff like that? Let's go look. So here's the Filestash GitHub. So let's go to issues. And scroll down, and the issue is called right here, bug office documents not viewable. You can see there's a whole bunch of comments on this thing. This has been a problem for a lot of people for a long time. So you click in here and you scroll down, and right here, Homegrown Labs, February 19th, says he was able to get it working with Nginx proxy manager. I use Caddy, so what he did didn't exactly work. But from here on, you start reading, and it will talk about the things that you need to make sure are working, right? And so he actually puts out his whole Docker Compose. So again, if you want more detail of how this thing works, this is a good resource. However, what I've found is using Portainer, it's not the same thing as using this Docker Compose. Specifically, I kept having problems down here with these commands in the Docker Compose, and so I quit using that part, and so I built a Docker Compose, and so let's go look at my Docker Compose to get Collabora set up. So here's the YAML that I'm using for the Docker Compose, and I do build my Collabora container with the Docker Compose rather than through Portainer, and the reason is I kept having problems with getting the setup to work. And once I finally did it this way, it worked, and I haven't tried to redo it with Portainer. If you build a container with a Docker Compose, it will still show up in Portainer for management. So again, it doesn't really matter that much. This is just the way I'm doing it. So you can see I've got Collabora being pulled in. The image I'm using is the Collabora /code:/latest. I've got the container name set to Collabora. I've got restart always. I'm putting it on that Caddy network, right, that we built. And then the environmental variables are pretty important. So you can see the extra params equals. And so you can see this whole thing, right? Now, again, if you looking at this video, you're like, oh, we'll want to be able to copy and paste this. Again, if you go back out to the GitHub, you know, here's the same thing I'm using, right? It is this, you know, --o, you know, :SSL.enable equals false, and then a space, and then --o, :SSL.termination equal true. So again, you can find it out here to copy and paste it. Other critical parts, right? You want to set the server name, and this is wherever you have Collabora, you know, where do you want it to end up on your domain? right? So here I'm saying collabora.yourmom.com, and again, wherever you want that thing to end up. And then the alias group 1 equals https:// ... All right. Those are all very important. Again, setting up port 9980, and then networks, Caddy network, external true. All right. So then run a Docker compose build of wherever you save this YAML, and it needs to be on, again, the server hosting Docker. Okay, so back, wow, all right, got some port nonsense coming through. So back out to the console now. Again, assuming that you've built a YAML file, and again, if you don't know how to do that, basically you would just do nano and then tell it where you want the file to be. So like you might put it in Docker / say collabora.yml, and then you would be able to open up a file, edit it, and save it, right? And it would end up in this path. Now, I've already got that file built, so you want to navigate to wherever you saved. So for me, I put mine at the, where did I put it? Docker Collabora. I didn't type that right. So cd, right? And so then you would do Docker compose, and let me zoom out here so that this isn't so small. I know it's way down here at the bottom. Docker compose -f, and then the name of your YAML file, YML, and then up D and run this, and it will build your container, right? Your Collabora container. All right, so the last thing we're going to do, I mentioned that there was this command that kept breaking, and that's why, you know, I couldn't get the Collabora stuff to work. Well, you can still run that command, just not during the setup is what I found. Now, some people have found that if you do a Docker compose, it was working for them. I couldn't get it to work with a Portainer. I was able to get Collabora working when I did a Docker compose, but I left this command out of what I showed you to do. So let's go ahead and finish up by running this command. And look, all it is some custom CSS that the creator of Filestash has created that slightly changes what you're going to see on the screen. It's this stuff right here. So over on the GitHub, you'll see these little curl commands, and you'll see it's basically going to copy a file for the desktop CSS from, and if I grab this, you'll see it's coming from GitHub, and it's coming from, this is actually the creator of Filestash, right? And so it's this big long path, and it's just grabbing some CSS code. So again, you don't have to do this, but if you want this ran after you've done this setup the way I've told you to do it, here's what we need to do. We need to get into the container and then just run this curl command. So open up console, again, on the server. So once you're in there, here's the command to run. Docker space exec space -it space -- user space root space Collabora, or again, whatever else you've named the Collabora container, space bash, hit enter. So now we are inside the container as the root user. Now you just copy that curl command, paste it, and run it. So back over here on the GitHub, again, grab this curl command, Control C, back to the console. Now, if you got a mouse, you can just middle click, or you can do Control Shift V or Command Shift V, I guess, if you got a Mac keyboard for some reason. And so that's the way to paste in here, because again, this is not something you want to type out, but then just hit enter. And you will see it basically downloaded the file and saved it as that desktop CSS. And now, basically, I think you might want to go ahead and restart your container, your Collabora container, but then it'll just use the custom CSS. I'm actually not exactly sure what it does. I think it may hide like a title bar or something, but yeah, there's really not much to it. I mean, this is what it looks like when you have the CSS. Maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't, but that's all you got to do. Now let's go back into Portainer and we can start managing this stuff. All right, so where you should be right now is you should have a Caddy container, a Filestash container, and a Collabora container all running. All right, so Collabora is pretty much done. So now we need to go back to Filestash and add the paths to the Collabora container for the web server stuff. And so here's where back out on that GitHub comes in handy, because you can see how other people have configured this, right? So the office URL needs to be HTTP, not HTTPS, right? So HTTP : // and then this needs to be the name of your Collabora container, then a colon, and then the port where your container is serving, right? So that needs to be set up as an office URL environmental variable. Then the office Filestash URL, this needs to be the domain name where Filestash is, right? So this would be like filestash.yourmom.com. Well, you can see it needs to be HTTPS : // again, it would be like filestash.yourmom.com. And then we need the rewrite URL. This is going to be your Collabora domain, right? So that's what this needs to be. So it would be https : // Okay, so where you will edit this is back in Portainer. These are the environmental variables that we need to add to the Filestash container. Now we're back into Portainer, going to Filestash, scroll well, actually we need to do duplicate edit, right? Then scroll down, and down here click on environmental variables. All right, so here we are, and so here's what you'll see, right? The application URL, this should already be set up for you, and it should be like, again, filestash.yourmom.com or whatever your domain name where you want Filestash to show up, right? This is what that should be. This is basically what you're reverse proxying to in Caddy, right? So then the office URL, this needs to be, again, http : // and then your container name for your Collabora install, right? And then :9980. The office / Filestash _ URL. This is basically this up here, but it needs to be with an HTTPS : / in front of it, right? So that's the office Filestash URL, right? So again, this is basically the office installation, how it's going to find Filestash. And then the office rewrite URL, this is your container for Collabora, where it's hosted, right? The domain name, but with an HTTPS. So it would be, it's something like Collabora or whatever you gave it subdomain wise, .yourmom.com, but again with an HTTPS : / in front of it. We are not all the way done yet, because now that all that's set up, we need to go back into your Caddy file and reverse proxy the Collabora container to this domain. All right, so basically once you're done with this, up here, deploy the container and it should rebuild Filestash with this stuff in there. You can double check if you want to. You can go up into your admin console and look and see if you scroll down. Actually, I'll show you where it shows up. So if you go into settings and then scroll down to the office section, you need to make sure that's enabled, right? And here's where this stuff will show up, right? You'll see the office server, right? And that's HTTP, right? And so this is, again, the location of the office server. You shouldn't have to enter this. If you've rebuilt your container using those environmental variables, these things will just show up, right? And so you'll see the Filestash server and then the rewrite discovery, right? So all this stuff, there you go. So this is where you can check to make sure that it took. So now we need to go back, and again, you need to edit your Caddy file, and I'll show you what you need to add there. All right, so now that we've got Collabora all set up, we just need to get it set up in our Caddy file. So go back to your Caddy file, and now we need to add some stuff for Collabora. Okay, so at the bottom of your Caddy file, here are the things you need to add. You need to add a block for your Collabora domain, right? So I've got like collabora.yourmom.com. The header here is not totally necessary. I think maybe there's some stuff that might be, again, this is just some security stuff. But again, the most important part, reverse proxy, the Collabora container, that name, and then colon, and then the port for that container, 9980. So once you save your Caddy file, you do want to restart the Caddy container. That way it refreshes, and it will be using the new Caddy file. And now things should work. So I would go and I would test and see, can you now open something like an Excel file? And again, if everything is set up correctly, this should now be working. And again, if it's not, then now you're going to have to dig through logs, try to identify where you might have gone wrong, double check all your syntax and everything else like that. But again, this is what's working for me. And again, let me show you the Caddy file again. So the bare bones, this, if nothing else is working for you, right, go back to your Caddy file and just do this, right? Just strip out everything. You should just have the domain for the Filestash, right? And then reverse proxying that container, and then the domain for Collabora, reverse proxying that container, right? So make sure that's set up. Then go back and check your containers to make sure that they're configured correctly, right? So if you go into your Filestash container and scroll down, you should see these environmental variables, right? So your application URL, that needs to be no HTTP stuff, just the pure domain. Where is your Filestash being reverse proxied? Right? The office URL needs to be HTTP, no S, but just HTTP : your Collabora container name : 9980. Again, assuming that's the port you've got that set. The office Filestash URL needs to be HTTPS : / and then again, the domain for where your Filestash is being reverse proxied. And then finally, the office rewrite URL. That is again, HTTPS : / your Collabora domain, right? Collabora.yourmon.com or whatever you've got that thing reverse proxied to. So that's what the Filestash variable should look like. So now, what should the Collabora container look like? So again, even though we did the Collabora container with a Docker Compose, it's still going to be able to be managed. So you should still be able to see this stuff in there. So again, extra parameters, make sure this is all correct. Again, that's going to be --O, and that is an O, that is not a 0. So 0 looks like this is an O. So --O : SSL.enable equals false, then a space, then --O : SSL.termination equals true. The server name, again, this is the domain where your Collabora is being reverse proxied. Right, and then the alias group 1, that is HTTPS : //.star:443. Again, make sure the ports are correct. You're using TCP, but again, that should all look like that. And lastly, even though it was in the Compose, you might just double check that Collabora got added to that Docker network that you created. So just like you had added Caddy and you'd added Filestash to that network, do the same thing for Collabora, right? Just to double check. I didn't find that I had to do that, but again, if you want to make sure that everything's working right, I'll show you how you can do that. So you set up that network, right? So to find out, making sure, hey, what all's on there, you can list it by doing docker network, spell it right, inspect, and then the network name. So like we had, I think, listed Caddy network. That's not what mine's called, so I can't hit enter, it wouldn't pull up. But like do this command and it will list everything. So like mine is actually called my Caddy Filestash network. And you should see the container show up here, right? So here, if I scroll down and it says right here containers, and I see Caddy and I see Filestash and I see Collabora, right? So you should see those. If you don't see one of them, just add it again. Right, so this is again how you can just double check, making sure everything can see each other on the network. Again, I can't go through the whole debugging of what may be going on because there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong with this. Look, it took me, I've been trying to get this to work for months, right? So don't be surprised if you got some kinks to work out. But, that's how you can see whether everything's on your Caddy network. The last thing I'll do is show you a couple of things that I did for security in my Caddy file. You don't have to do them, just stuff that I did, and let me show you. So this is more what my Caddy file actually looks like. So one thing I did at the kind of root domain here. So if anybody navigates to where I'm hosting this stuff and they don't know where they're going, it's just not going to serve them anything. It's going to say a 404 not found. Other things that I added, because you can anybody can navigate to that admin section of the Filestash server. I didn't like that, right? I don't like that being externally accessible. So to make sure that you can't navigate to the admin section, I put in where I'm doing the reverse proxy of Filestash. I've got this admin block little section, and you can see basically all this is doing is if somebody tries to go to any admin section, it just gives them a block and says you can't navigate there. I can still do it for my local access when I do it directly on the local network, but this will block anything from outside from getting to that admin panel. That's one of the downsides. Something I don't like about Filestash is they do kind of have that admin section just open and it doesn't have multi-factor authentication. So I don't like that very much. I've also got some stuff for, crawlers to block them. A lot of crawlers ignore those, but I do have that put in there. And then I've got some cross-origin stuff here for Collabora. I don't know that it's really necessary, but again, if you leave this stuff out and it works, and then you add it back in and it breaks, maybe you leave it out. It's been working for me. I haven't had trouble with it, but again, it's just to allow for some cross-origin stuff between Collabora and Filestash just in case. So with that, I hope we've got you up and running. This is not super easy. There's a lot of little details, right? I mean, the way Filestash is configured, you get a slash in the wrong spot. If you got a space where it shouldn't be, everything is very careful with the syntax. The Caddy file has to be set up just a certain way, or else stuff breaks, and then it just breaks and you're having to error check it. So, like I said, I would point you back to that GitHub issue if you run into unique problems or you're using like Nginx or some other reverse proxy method and you're not using Caddy, then things are going to be different. If you've got Docker set up different, if you're using Docker Compose, whereas I'm using Portainer for management, stuff's going to be different. The people there on the GitHub have been really good about helping each other, and so I would kind of point you there for any little technical details where your configuration is a little different than mine. You're using a different backend, maybe for Filestash, then maybe you should go ask there, because I'm really only used to doing it the way I've got it set up, and if you're doing something else, it just may not work. But, if you do everything like I do it, mine's working. So, best of luck. Feel free to leave a comment if you got questions. I will try to answer them as best I can. But again, this is a hassle, and I have also struggled with it. I'm trying to show you what's worked for me. I may or may not be able to help you, but I will do my best. With that, as always, I appreciate your time. Thanks.